June 13th. It is a date that should be just another mark on the calendar, but in the annals of British organised crime, it signifies a chilling coincidence written in blood. In 2018, in Greater Manchester, Luke Graham was executed in broad daylight, shot 5 times in a van while his killer walked calmly to a nearby pub. Exactly 2 years later, on June 13, 2020, Robert Powell was gunned down outside a party in Essex, shot 8 times while his executioners vanished into the night. 2 different cities, 2 different years, but the methodology was identical. Brazen daylight attacks. Multiple witnesses. Killers who evaporated into thin air. For years, police were baffled by how these men could simply cease to exist. But they were not just lucky, they were customers. What investigators uncovered was not just 2 separate escape plans, but a singular, industrial-scale underground railroad for the UK's most dangerous men, a specialised travel agency for murderers operating out of Spain, charging premium rates to turn killers into ghosts. Hit subscribe, because we are about to open the files on the secret network that kept 35 of Britain's worst criminals free, and the terrifying fact that 21 of them are still out there watching this right now. Before the world knew him as a fugitive, the streets of East London knew Nana Oppong by a different, more invincible moniker, the Teflon Man. In the criminal underworld, a nickname like that is not given lightly. It is earned through a terrifying ability to walk away from chaos unscathed. To understand the violence that would eventually claim Robert Powell, you first have to understand the man who hunted him. Oppong was not a low-level thug, he was a phantom in the system. Police files painted a picture of a man consistently surrounded by death, yet never holding the smoking gun when the handcuffs came out. The legend began in earnest back in May 2010 at the Sugar Lounge nightclub. What was meant to be a birthday celebration for Oppong descended into a bloodbath. A shootout erupted between rival factions outside the venue, leaving Eugene Brown and Patrick Ford dead on the pavement. Another man, Michael Smith, took 6 bullets, 1 directly to the head, and miraculously survived. Police intelligence suggested Oppong had orchestrated the chaos, allegedly arming a gunman and identifying targets just moments before the firing started. He stood trial for murder twice. Twice the jury failed to reach a verdict. The evidence was there, but the conviction was not. He walked away with a minor sentence for lying to the police, serving barely any time. The pattern repeated in May 2014 in Denham. Another birthday party, another young father dead. Ashley Latty was subjected to a frenzied attack by a mob, beaten and stabbed to death outside a community hall. Oppong was right there in the thick of it. Yet, when the gavel fell, he admitted only to grievous bodily harm, not murder. He served a fraction of a 4-year sentence and was back on the streets. His reputation as the Teflon Man cemented. He was disciplined, detached, and seemingly untouchable. But by 2020, the streets had changed, and so had his targets. This time, the crosshairs settled on Robert Powell. At 50 years old, Powell was not a street soldier or an enforcer clearing territory. Known as Fox, he was a grandfather and a music manager, a respected figure who worked with rising stars like the rapper Dutchavelli. However, the London music scene in 2020 had become a dangerous ecosystem where the lines between entertainment and organized crime had blurred into non-existence. Powell moved in circles where reputation was the only currency that mattered, and a single slight, a rumor, or an unpaid debt could be a death sentence. Intelligence suggests Oppong held a deep, personal grudge against Powell. While the exact catalyst remains buried in the whispers of the underworld, the intent was clear. Powell had been marked. In the weeks leading up to June 2020, friends noticed Powell was looking over his shoulder. Cautious, aware that his name was being spoken in rooms he was not invited to, he knew the Teflon Man was watching, but he had no idea that a sophisticated surveillance operation, utilizing military-grade encrypted technology, was already tracking his every step, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. In the modern underworld, silence is a commodity sold at a premium. For Nana Oppong and his crew, that silence was bought for £1.500 every 6 months, in the form of an EncroChat device. These modified handsets, stripped of microphones, cameras and GPS, running a hidden operating system, were the WhatsApp for gangsters, a network of 60,000 criminals across Europe who believed their Conversations were mathematically impossible to crack. It was on this digital platform, hidden behind the handles Enza Oppong and Slick his lieutenant, Isra Shah, that the murder of Robert Powell was meticulously engineered. The digital trail reveals a chilling persistence. The first attempt on Powell's life was scheduled for June 5, 2020, at a crowded block party in Beckton, East London. Encrypted logs show the hit squad in position, weapons ready, scanning the crowd. But the plan was aborted at the 11th hour. Slick messaged ends with frustration, "How do we plan to do this? I am sick of the acting, bro." Oppong, ever the disciplined tactician, called it off, because he was spooked by the presence of feds. Police patrols were too visible, they would not risk a firefight with law enforcement. The execution was postponed, not cancelled. 8 days later, the trap was reset. June 13, 2020, 4:58 a.m., the location was Water Lane in Roydon, Essex. Powell had spent the night at a private party, a scene described as joyous, filled with food, music and familiar faces. He had no idea that outside the venue, a mechanical shark was circling. CCTV footage, later recovered by detectives, showed a convoy of 3 vehicles, a Ford Cougar with cloned plates acting as the strike car, a Vauxhall Zafira carrying the backup crew, and a Toyota Prius driven by Isra Shah as the lookout, looping the area repeatedly. They were watching the doors, counting the minutes. When Powell finally emerged into the early morning light with his 2 adult sons, the Ford Cougar slowed to a crawl. The passenger door swung open, and a figure believed to be Nana Oppong stepped out, raising a 9mm pistol. There was no hesitation. 8 rounds shattered the morning silence. Powell was hit repeatedly and collapsed beside a parked Ford Mondeo. The violence was indiscriminate. 1 bullet passed clean through a woman standing nearby and embedded itself in another woman's ankle. Both survived, but the message was clear: collateral damage was acceptable. The convoy vanished within seconds, speeding from Roydon to Oppong and then out of the county. Under normal circumstances, the trail would have gone cold. The car plates were fake, the shell casings were generic 9mm, and the shooters were masked. But the criminals' greatest asset, EncroChat, had just become their greatest liability. Unknown to Oppong, French and Dutch authorities had breached the encrypted server just days earlier. Investigators were reading their messages in real time. They watched the digital footprint of a murder unfold. They saw ENS ordering specific 9mm ammunition types that matched the casings found at the scene. They read the timestamps that aligned perfectly with the CCTV of the convoy. And perhaps most chillingly, they read the final message sent by Oppong hours after the killing. All clear. Handle your side. 2 days later, Oppong's handset was wiped remotely, a standard protocol to destroy evidence. But it was too late. The ghost image of the data was already on a police server. The Teflon Man had left a digital fingerprint that could not be scrubbed away. However, by the time the strike teams prepared to raid his home, the nest was empty. Oppong, Shah, and a third accomplice, Temitope Adeyinka, were already gone. Rewind the clock exactly 2 years. June 13, 2018. While Nana Oppong was still navigating the London underworld, a different breed of violence was brewing 200 miles north in Greater Manchester. This was a turf war, raw and territorial, fought over the control of cocaine and cannabis supplies in Tameside. On one side was Luke Graham, a 31-year-old father and impulsive dealer trying to carve out his own slice of the market. On the other was a group led by Wade Cox, a man the courts would later describe as willing to use extreme violence to assert dominance. And, standing right beside Cox, acting as his shadow and enforcer, was Callum Halpin. By the summer of 2018, the warnings had stopped. The rivalry had bled past the point of negotiation. Cox's crew was not planning a beating. They were planning a removal. The trap they designed was simple, brutal, and relied entirely on Graham's loyalty to his friends. They used a local drug user known as Peanut as live bait. Messages were sent to Graham, claiming Peanut was in trouble, cornered by rival dealers near a house on Birch Street. It was a classic distress call, designed to trigger an immediate, unguarded response. Graham, acting on instinct, grabbed his associate Anton Verigotta and drove straight into the kill zone in a V5 Gurasulzi, white Volkswagen Caddy van. At 4:40 p.m., the van pulled up on the quiet residential street. It was broad daylight. Kids were home from school. Neighbors were gardening. Graham stepped out, scanned the area, spoke briefly to someone near the house, and then climbed back into the passenger seat. He did not see the stolen Audi, a 3 idling, just a few doors down. He did not see the shark moving in the water until it was too late. The Audi surged forward. Inside were Wade Cox and Callum Halpin. The vehicle boxed the van in, and then the execution began with terrifying efficiency. Callum Halpin did not just participate, he ensured the outcome. He sprinted to the passenger side of the van and slammed the door shut, physically trapping Luke Graham inside the vehicle, broken off his only escape route. In that split second of realization, Graham looked up to see Wade Cox raising a handgun just feet from the window. 5 shots rang out. 3 bullets tore into Luke Graham, killing him instantly. Another struck Verigota, who managed to survive despite severe injuries. The entire ambush took less than 60 seconds. The Audi squealed away, heading for Gorton, leaving a shattered community in its wake. Within an hour, the getaway car was a charred skeleton, torched to destroy DNA and fingerprints. But it is Callum Halpin's behavior in the aftermath that chills the blood. Most men, after participating in a daylight execution, would be trembling, hiding, or fleeing. Not Halpin. Less than an hour after watching the life leave Luke Graham's eyes, Halpin was captured on CCTV, strolling into the corner shop pub in Ashton. He sat at the bar, ordered a drink, and casually scrolled through his phone. He looked bored. Later that afternoon, he went to a local gym, chatting with acquaintances about the weather and workout routines. It was a level of psychopathic detachment that stunned detectives. He had just helped wipe a father off the face of the earth, and he treated it like a mundane Wednesday afternoon. Police moved quickly. Operation Cranbrook swept up the lower-level players and eventually caught the shooter, Wade Cox, who was handed a life sentence. But Halpin, he was gone. Like smoke in a draft, he vanished before the handcuffs could click. For the next 4 years, the man who could kill and then calmly sip a pint became a ghost, leaving Manchester police with a cold trail and a burning question. How does a 27-year-old local enforcer suddenly acquire the resources to disappear completely? By 2021, the National Crime Agency (NCA) was staring at a map of Europe that looked less like a police investigation and more like a conspiracy board. They were running concurrent operations tracking 2 of the UK's most dangerous men, Nana Oppong, the Teflon Man wanted for the Essex execution, and Callum Halpin, the Manchester hitman who treated murder like a coffee break. On the surface, these cases were completely unrelated. Different gangs, different motives, different cities. But when intelligence analysts began layering the digital footprints of their flight paths, a startling geometric pattern emerged. The coincidences were mathematically impossible. Both men had fled the UK within days of their respective kills. Both had utilized high-quality forged documents to slip passport security. Both had entered Spain through the exact same gateway in Valencia, and most damning of all, both had eventually settled in the exact same district of Alicante on the Costa del Sol. When financial investigators peeled back the layers of the rental agreements for their safe houses, they found they were managed by the same UK-based shell company. They were not just running to the same country, they were clients of the same travel agency. At the center of this web sat a man who did not carry a gun, but whose power exceeded any street soldier. His name was Marcus Donnelly, a 52-year-old Liverpool native. Donnelly had fled the UK himself in 2009 to avoid a drug trafficking conviction. But instead of living a quiet life in exile, he saw a gap in the market. He realized that the Costa del Sol, long known as the Costa del Crime, needed infrastructure. It needed a CEO. So Donnelly built an industrial-scale fugitive processing operation, a protection racket turned corporate service provider. Donnelly operated like a high-end concierge for the criminal elite. His service menu was comprehensive and professional. For a placement fee of £50,000, a fugitive received the starter package, a full suite of flawlessly forged identity documents, passports, driving licenses, birth certificates, and the keys to a secure, cash-only safe house. But the business model did not stop there. Donnelly ran a subscription service. For a maintenance fee of £10,000 per month, he provided ongoing protection, vehicle rentals that could not be traced, and a money laundering service that allowed criminals to access their UK cash without triggering banking alerts. It was, in essence, an Uber for fugitives. Instead of a ride across town, you ordered a new life. Investigators discovered that between 2009 and 2022, Donnelly had successfully processed at least 35 British criminals. He offered them the ultimate luxury, invisibility in plain sight, while British police hunted them in the rain-soaked streets of London and Manchester. Oppong and Halpin were living comfortably under the Spanish sun, protected by a network of bribed officials and local muscle, all coordinated by the man from Liverpool. Donnelly's operation was so sophisticated that he even offered emergency extraction protocols, premium tiers of service that included immediate relocation. If law enforcement got too close, he had turned the obstruction of justice into a business worth an estimated £6 million. He was the reason the trail had gone cold. But in building such a massive client list, Donnelly had made a fatal error. He had created a centralized database of the UK's most wanted men. If the police could take down the architect, the entire shelter would collapse on top of everyone hiding inside it. By late 2021, the game of cat and mouse had evolved into an international siege. The National Crime Agency (NCA) and Essex Police, realizing the scale of the network they were up against, forged a tactical alliance with the Spanish National Police. This was not just a hunt for individual men anymore. It was an attempt to dismantle a logistical empire. They pooled resources, sharing real-time intelligence on cell tower pings, financial transactions, and the subtle mistakes that even disciplined fugitives eventually make. Nana Oppong was the first to feel the walls closing in. The Teflon Man, sensing that his sanctuary in the Costa del Sol was becoming compromised, made a desperate strategic pivot. He decided to abandon Europe entirely. His target was North Africa, specifically Morocco, a region where he believed his connections would offer better protection. On a warm evening in September 2022, a man driving a rental car approached the border control booth at the port of Tangier. He handed over a Maltese passport. The photo looked like him, the name sounded legitimate, and the stamps were perfect forgeries from Donnelly's factory. But the Moroccan border guards, alerted by Interpol red notices, were looking closer than usual. A standard biometric scan changed everything. The fingerprints on the scanner did not match the Maltese tourist on the passport. They matched a database entry from the United Kingdom, marked Urgent Homicide. Nana Oppong, the man who had dodged 2 murder trials and outrun the law for 2 years, was handcuffed quietly at a border checkpoint. When he was finally extradited back to the UK in June 2023, bodycam footage captured the end of the legend. Escorted off a plane at a private London airfield, he sat in the back of a police van calm, expressionless, nodding slightly as the charges were read. The Teflon coating had finally worn off. While Oppong was being processed, the net was tightening around Callum Halpin in Alicante. The Manchester hitman had spent 4 years living as a ghost, occasionally spotted but never pinned down. He had even been living alongside other high-profile fugitives, including Alex Mail, one of the UK's most wanted drug traffickers, creating a bizarre sort of fugitive fraternity house. But his luck ran out on May 30th, 2022. Acting on precise intelligence from the NCA, armed Spanish officers surrounded a nondescript apartment complex. They did not knock. They breached the door, swarming the property. Halpin was found inside, attempting to scramble away, but there was nowhere to go. The man who had sat so calmly in a pub after a murder offered no resistance when the barrels of automatic rifles were pointed at his chest. But the most devastating blow to the Underworld came just days later. In June 2022, Spanish police executed a coordinated raid on the nerve center of the operation, Marcus Donnelly's villa. What they found inside was an intelligence goldmine that would keep analysts busy for years. It was not just cash or drugs. It was paperwork. Meticulous, organized records. They found client files listing 35 British fugitives by name and alias. They found ledgers detailing £2.8 million in placement fees alone. They found the templates for the UK passports and driving licenses that had allowed killers to cross borders. Donnelly was arrested on the spot, his empire of shadows illuminated by the flashlights of the Spanish police. The architect was in custody, and in his possession was the master key to the locations of dozens of other criminals. The Underground Railroad had been derailed, and the passenger manifest was now in the hands of the authorities. The wheels of justice turned slowly, but when they finally crushed the Teflon Man and the Manchester executioner, the weight was absolute. In May 2024, at Woolwich Crown Court, Nana Oppong and Isra Shah stood in the dock for the murder of Robert Powell. The prosecution unleashed a tidal wave of evidence. The EncroChat logs where they ordered bullets, the CCTV of the cloned convoy, and the forensic analysis that shattered their alibis. Oppong tried to claim he was not Enns, that his name had been wrongly attached to the encrypted handle. Shah admitted to being at the scene but claimed he was merely a drug dealer caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. The jury did not buy a word of it. On May 28, 2024, the gavel fell. Nana Oppong, the man who believed he could slide off any charge, was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 38 years. Isra Shah received life with a minimum of 26 years. A year earlier, in February 2023, Callum Halpin had faced his own reckoning at Manchester Crown Court. His defence was just as hollow. He claimed he was nowhere near the public execution of Luke Graham. The judge, disgusted by the brutality of the crime, handed him a life sentence with a minimum of 30 years. Across these cases, combined with the 18-year sentence handed to Marcus Donnelly by a Pacolay Spanish court in September 2023, the justice system had doled out over 160 years of prison time. Case closed. Justice served. The network dismantled. Or so it seemed. Because when investigators finally sat down to fully analyze the client files seized from Donnelly's Spanish villa, the celebration turned into a cold realization. The ledger did not just contain the names of Oppong and Halpin. It listed 35 distinct British fugitives who had utilized Donnelly's services between 2009 and 2022. The breakdown was the stuff of nightmares: 12 wanted for murder or attempted murder, 8 for industrial-scale drug trafficking, 7 for firearms offenses, and 3 for sexual crimes. As of 2024, the math is terrifying. Of the 35 names on that list, only 14 have been tracked down, arrested, and extradited. That leaves 21. 21 violent, desperate men who paid Donnelly premium rates to disappear are still out there. They are still using the false identities he forged for them. They are likely still living in the safe houses he arranged, or have used the emergency extraction protocols he taught them to move to countries with no extradition treaties. Marcus Donnelly did not just run a travel agency. He released a virus into the system that has not been fully purged. He built a business worth an estimated £6 million by ensuring that killers could sleep soundly while the families of their victims lay awake. The infrastructure has been destroyed, the architect is in a cell, but the ghosts he created are still walking among us. The hunt for the remaining 21 is now the top priority for European law enforcement, but the trail is cold. These men know they are being hunted. They know their protector is gone, and that makes them more dangerous than ever. If this story of the Underground Railroad for killers shocked you, hit that like button and share this video. Someone watching might recognize a face from a wanted poster one day. Subscribe to UK Crime Central and ring the bell, because this manhunt is not over. Not by a long shot. The Teflon Man and the executioner are behind bars. But the file on the Donnelly network remains open.